Hello and welcome to another episode of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. Gosh, this weekend was such a fun weekend. Oh my goodness. There was Oceanside 70.3 and Galveston, also a 70.3. So many athletes racing this weekend. I was watching you and maybe some of you as well were either competing or also watching some of the races go down. I know that I had a lot of people that were kind of texting me back and forth. It was a very, very exciting weekend with a lot of really great race events, as well as PRs and all of those fun things. It was exciting to watch everybody. And it was sort of like a kickoff to the season almost. I feel like now it's going to be a lot of just race stuff coming up. I have the 70.3 in Victoria coming up in a couple of months, and I've been I would say on and off training for that. I've been, I think I talked about it last year in a couple episodes in the past, but I've been still dealing with some health related issues from Coeur d'Alene, which, well, they weren't directly from Coeur d'Alene, but it was from all of the hot races of the year. And, I would say I guess in some ways I just didn't really take some of the heat stuff seriously, and I still wanted to continue racing, which makes sense, right? Like when you have those goals and those things planned, I just didn't entirely know what I was getting into, I guess, as far as heat stuff goes. And so what I'm dealing with now is a histamine release where if I get into a hot and damp environment. So like getting out of the shower, for example, is one, or if I like wash my hands too much when I go to my practice, because obviously I wash my hands between each patient. I like that hot water I'll start to just break out in hives across the back of my hands. And then I'll be like super itchy and red after showers. And then, if there's anything else, like I'll be working out, maybe like on a bike, or if I have like a super intense workout, I will start itching all over, and I'll start kind of breaking out in hives in just different areas. It's a very, very interesting thing to happen. And there's a lot of different reasons for it. And there's a lot of possible different causes for it. But part of what I've been trying to deal with is managing, not putting too much stress into my system. And how do you balance out that stress and rest and fit and all that stuff? So what I actually thought that we would talk about, well, first off, I just wanted to say congratulations to everybody who did race this weekend. It was such a fun race weekend to watch. And I know that there's going to be a lot of fun races coming up. So I thought we would start off with that. And then what I thought we would do is kind of go down this road of, I think as a general theme on this podcast that we've talked about quite a bit is this balance between health and fitness and performance, and how do you manage both the two of those? I was actually last week, it was the week before, I had Tennille Hoogland on, who does she's one of the big people who focuses on perimenopause and beyond for athletes. And I was actually you will all see it, but we recorded a podcast this past weekend all about this idea of being fit and healthy and being able to perform, but also be able to be healthy at the same time. And I thought I would sort of just expand on that. That summit will be coming up in May. So if you want to catch that, make sure you just keep an eye out on some of our social media channels and things like that, because that'll be coming up soon. You can also follow me on Instagram too, if you want to keep your eye out for that. But what I wanted to talk about today is this idea of that mix between that fitness and health, and fitness and performance and health, and how those potentially can work together. Because I think there's this idea that fitness in that like super, super, super high level doesn't necessarily come with health. And then there's this other idea that I think people have is just like that athletes in general must be super healthy people. And I think that's a misconception sometimes that catches everybody off guard. And then, you see like, like athletes get cancer, and you see athletes get really, really sick, or like, COVID took a lot of athletes out in a sense. And then everybody was like super confused because they feel like athletes are these like super healthy people. Right. And so I want to kind of bridge that gap a bit, because I actually think that there's a lot of room for improvement in this area. And as part of what my mission is, I guess, when I work with athletes is, and just putting a lot of this information out there, is that there is a balance and that there's room for both. So here's kind of where we'll start. I think most athletes, and this probably includes you, you want to perform well, right? I know that includes me. Like, yes, I have a lot of different goals, but anytime you go into these races, you want to perform well. And in training, you want to perform well. I think you also, I think we all want to be injury free and as pain free as we possibly can be. And then maybe also you're probably doing a lot of this because you want to feel good and you want to feel healthy and you want to achieve that personal goal, whatever that is. Maybe that's a personal best on a race day in a 70.3, or maybe that's just accomplishing one, right? Or maybe that's losing 10 to 20 pounds and you've chosen triathlons or something like that to help you do that. Or maybe this is just the way that, like for me, a big part of why I do triathlon is because, number one, I love it. I think I love all of the different aspects, and I've loved the challenge of trying to get better at things that I historically have not been good at. And also, like, I do it because it keeps me active, right? It keeps me mobile. It keeps me moving. And I do have a goal of a 5-hour 70, which I haven't achieved yet, and I will get there. But and then I have some bigger goals in that as well. But, I think the biggest thing for me is that I think this is probably fairly similar for a lot of people, is that you do it because you want to stay healthy, you want to stay fit, and it's just part of what keeps you active and keeps you mobile throughout the week. But here's kind of where some of the issues start, is that the problem, I think, with this kind of with getting into sport in general, is that most athletes will focus only on their training, but they'll ignore or get confused about daily nutrition, and will oftentimes leave sports nutrition for figuring out the days before race day. Or I guess also to say, like, they will run from, essentially like strategy to strategy with nothing really ever changing. And they'll often forget, I think too, that their health is one really, really, really key factor for helping with not just like recovery, but also with energy. And then all of that combined, right, all leads to peak performance. So I think, like, the question is, how do you build a foundation of health and then also not sacrifice your performance at the same time? And one of the things that I talked about with Tendil, which you'll have to go check out that summit to really see the rest, like what we got into, is that there is, I think, room for performing really, really well and being really healthy too. I read an article from a very well-known nutritionist that, basically said that the Super Bowl NFL players, teams, when they, like, it's almost guaranteed that when they make it to the Super Bowl, they're probably likely fairly micronutrient deficient, and that they, aren't necessarily probably the most healthy at that time frame, which is true. And I've seen the labs to prove that. But my question, though, is when you are looking at, and this could go for, I'm talking about the NFL there, but this could also be applied to anybody necessarily in the triathlon world, for sure, because endurance sports happen to be one of the most inflammatory sports basically to do. And anyway, so my point in all of this is that if you look at like those examples, but then if you also look at what happens when like female athletes lose their period in pursuit of performance, their performance, and I'm putting that kind of like in air quotes, only necessarily lasts for anywhere between less than a year to 2 years to 5 years, and then they just completely tank. And arguably, their performance isn't even really at the level that it possibly could be at, because they are in this state where they're in low energy deficits, and there's a lot of other things that are happening that, like, just the body just doesn't have what it needs in order to fuel properly. So my pursuit here is, I think there's a lot of space and a lot of room for a discussion around what it would look like to have athletes that are doing everything they can to stay healthy, but also work on performance. And so that's what today's podcast is going to be about. So if you wanted to necessarily build like a foundation of health, but not, and at the same time, not sacrifice your performance in that sense, one of the things you could do is you could get a lab test that depending on the doctor, they may or may not be able to read that with a sports, lifestyle in mind, with the athlete lifestyle in mind. And then also, you could also read more articles, or you could listen to more podcasts on sports fueling and nutrition, which is basically where I started, right? It's like I was going through school, and then I was also trying to learn all of these things and reading textbooks. And then I wanted to hear from athletes what they were doing. So I listened to a ton of podcasts that were interviewing athletes on nutrition, and just started picking up on some of the things that they were doing, and then reading, trying to find that in research, and just trying to put together what the current standards were, and then where there might be room for improvement. The other thing you could do too is you could hire a nutritionist, right? Or a dietitian. But here's the thing. Some sports nutritionists and dietitians, and I'm not grouping them. I don't group doctors all in the same thing, like medical doctors. I don't group nutritionists or sports nutritionists or dietitians or anything like that. I don't like to group people into one category, because I don't think it's fair. But there are some industry standards that can be definitely broken, and there are plenty of amazing people out there. You just have to find them. But the argument that I have here is that there are still plenty of nutritionists and dietitians, and still plenty. No, that doesn't mean that's everybody, but there's still plenty of them that don't know how sport can affect your gut and your gut bacteria, or how the environment in your gut can lead to resistance to fatigue or to better performance. So there's a lot of different areas that, you can go into with sports medicine and sports nutrition, and looking at the system basically as a whole. And the thing is that you can put all of those things together if you kind of consider this idea of basically functional medicine for athletes, and taking more of a systems-based approach, because ultimately, like, looking at how the body functions, what each individual piece is supposed to be doing, and then how all of those interact together is part of creating a foundation for your body really to be able to function and perform, all from, essentially taking the idea from the inside out, right? And when most athletes, thinking about this, when most athletes try to combine their health and performance, what comes across especially in my appointments, is that they have a tendency to worry that they won't get enough calories, carbs, fuel in if they're eating tons of veggies. And there is a piece into that, but there's a lot of balance there that's really important. Or they focus on increasing their carbohydrates through fast sugars, right? That's a very, very common one. And still, I'm not saying not necessarily to do that, but I am saying that there needs to be a lot of balance there. And those fast sugars can cause changes with the gut bacteria that then ends up leading to more inflammation and fatigue, right? So already you can start to see how some of the most common things that people are told to do can actually have a fairly significant impact on what's going on inside the body. And then if you pursue that and you allow that to kind of maintain it for 6 months to a year to several years down the line, you can start to see why, there are many athletes and people who start to deal with injuries and start to deal with pain and start to deal with, bodies that start breaking down, or autoimmune disease and things like that, because you've effectively changed what's going on inside the body to a point that the body can't really sustain the level of performance that you're requiring from it. Right. And often too, like at the same time, we often are told that, we need to be taking supplements, or you might even like worry that, you're going to have to spend even more of your time in training or cooking food, right? Like, because especially when you look at around like supplements and then also nutrition catches a lot of people up because they don't have a lot of time in their day. And so a lot of athletes, and, cause you might be spending an hour and a half to 2 to 3 hours each day training, depending on what level you're at. And then you also might have a family, and then you also probably have a job. And that I understand that there's not everybody that's going to fit into all of those categories. But the point being, where a lot of people get caught up in nutrition is when it just is going to take a ton of time. And it's going to take potentially even time from their training to cook food, right? Or it's just a hassle to cook after a 3-hour bike ride or a 2-hour run. And all you want to do is like chill out. And you don't necessarily want to be cooking food. So there's a lot of different reasons why I think people don't get a lot of those things in. And the thing to think about is that there's so much information, right? And I know this, there's so much information out there because I get asked all the questions, right? About what you should be doing, or, and all of that, like all of those things, right, that we just talked about that you might be trying to figure out on your own, end up leading to a lot of wasted time, a lot of confusion, and it can cost a lot of money as well. So I think where I wanted to go with this podcast today is just sort of breaking down some of those things, because there's so many different things that people can be doing, and it can be very confusing. So let's just talk about like a couple of, so what we're going to do, since I've kind of framed that, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to go into some of the areas that you can just focus on that will help to create a foundation for moving forward if you are interested in this whole idea of pursuing being fit and healthy versus potentially working yourself into being fit and fatigued towards race day. So we'll be right back after this short break. So part of where I wanted to start off with this, and I recognize on this podcast as a whole, we've talked about a lot of these different aspects in chunks, but the thing that I wanted to kind of, I guess, just drive home a bit as far as talking about this idea of that fit and fatigued athlete to a fit and healthy athlete is where people tend to get caught up, right? So like when we're talking about getting enough calories, carbs, and fuel in, one of the things that you'll see as a common theme is that you want to keep those starchy carbohydrates up when you are getting closer and closer and closer to race day. But to do that, that means that you're likely going to be consuming less of like veggies and things that are going to be very, very high in antioxidants. And in a previous episode, what we talked about was this idea that when you are in that training phase, one of the things you want to stay away from and avoid are supplements like that are very heavy in antioxidants, because supplemental antioxidants like vitamin C, vitamin E, and some of those others have been shown in many, many, many different studies to delay your adaptation to exercise. And so, and there are always different scenarios where you wouldn't necessarily fit into that category. Okay. So like you might want to be taking a supplement of some type because of some certain thing going on. So there are exceptions to all of that. But as a general rule, one of the things you want to be careful of is supplements. So and in training phase particularly, okay, I'm not necessarily talking about the whole entire year. Again, you can go back to some previous episodes to find that on heart rate variability and managing and being careful as far as like the supplements that you take. But my point here is that in order to mop up some of that inflammation that happens and make sure that it doesn't, overflow and cause so much load or stress for the system that then you end up in this sort of like overtrained and kind of fatigued state, is that a lot of that, then a lot of those antioxidants and anti-inflammatories have to be coming in through food. So vegetables, fruits, lots of colorful fruits and veggies have to be present, but you don't necessarily have to look at it as a day-to-day thing. You could also look at it as like a whole in an entire week, which I think is a much easier way to kind of consider nutrition, is thinking that, you know, because I know for some of my days training for the full Ironman, you know, on a weekend, I'd have prescribed like a 3-hour ride, and then there might be like a swim earlier that day or something like that. So it's like, you know, potentially spending 4 hours training. And some of you might be doing 4 to 6 hours a day training. One of the things that you then have to think about is like, how are you going to get in enough food and calories and to support that? And you're going to be in an energy deficit on those long training days. It's just how it goes, because there's not enough time to put enough food into your system to balance that out. I mean, yes, you could go for like super, super high calorie foods like pizzas and stuff like that, which some people will do because you just crave it, right? But my point is that ultimately what you want to look at is the next few days coming up after that. And you want to look at the week as a whole, because your rest days become the days where you can be eating way more food to balance out what you were missing from the few days before and to help with recovery. And in that, you can be making sure you're getting a wide range of different types of colorful fruits and vegetables, while also keeping up with the protein and the carbohydrates too. So there's room for it all. My point is just that if you are following kind of the idea that it's too hard to get in enough food when you're eating enough vegetables and fruits, that's a very, very risky place to be, because you need some of those antioxidants and anti-inflammatories coming in from food. They're kind of what will create that foundation for a healthy body, in the sense that you'll be allowing your body and the food that you eat to help mop up some of that oxidative stress and that inflammation that happens through training and through load and through anything else that, you know, your body gets exposed to throughout the day. The other thing is also the gut health side of things, right? Which we talked about. Well, I guess also I should say too, with that vegetable piece, part of the other thing that you're wanting to fight is that micronutrient deficiency thing that can happen, right? So like I'm talking here about vitamin D and B12 and iron and all the other ones, vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin E, your minerals like magnesium and manganese and zinc, and potassium. All of those different ones are essential to make sure that you are performing well. And micronutrient deficiencies are very, very common in athletes because you have such a high need for them. And it's higher than your normal average requirements of people who don't train like most endurance and triathletes do. So the key is, again, to be making sure that first off, you're getting enough of those veggies and fruits and protein to get in enough of those amino acids and those micronutrients to balance out all of that as best as you can. And then it's just being aware and keeping tabs on things to make sure that you aren't developing an outright deficiency as you go throughout the training year, right? Because those micronutrients can lead to injuries and things like that. So that's, again, just one other reason to, first off, be pulling tests, but also to make sure that your nutrition is solid, because that's one piece, that's one pillar of a very good foundation for health. Another thing is, with the gut health that I was talking about, and a couple episodes ago, we talked a lot about the GI tract, but a piece there is that making sure that the gut bacteria and that your food outside of your training supports really good gut bacteria. And that can be through things like sauerkraut and kimchi and yogurt and eating prebiotic foods, not probiotic, prebiotic foods like onions and garlics and carrots, I think, are a prebiotic, as well as chicory root and sunchokes, which are Jerusalem artichokes, and mushrooms and beans, and all of those things help to feed certain types of gut bacteria to keep them there. The the piece of that, that's all why that's so important, is because if you are only kind of focusing on those high carbohydrate foods, those fast sugars that you can get through fuel sources like gels and candy and things like that, you've got to be very careful and make sure that the rest of your day is really balanced well with those gut supportive foods, because the stress from training plus the stress from those sugar and the changes that those sugars can have on the gut bacteria can increase stress on the system, and then also cause changes in the bacteria to the point that it can affect your health. And it can also affect how you perform, because remember what I was saying, well, maybe if you haven't been with us before, in a previous episode talking about the gut, one of the things that we can do is by changing the gut bacteria, we can actually improve your resistance to fatigue, meaning that's a lot of fancy words to say you can have so much energy towards the end of the race just because of certain types of bacteria that influence your mitochondria. And then all of those, as you are building those throughout a season, can lead to really good results on race day. The other thing that we want to be careful of as well as part of that foundational pillar is inflammation and fatigue. And part of the micronutrient piece in avoiding supplements is to allow the body to mop up inflammation on its own, which helps you to adapt very quickly to training. But when you need to reduce inflammation and when you need to be careful and watch it is when those inflammatory markers start to rise up more than what your body can handle on its own. And then that's going to be a very, very good time to introduce anti-inflammatories and get your whole body, situated and then headed back into training. And part of that can be done through labs, and there's a lot of different ways that you can manage that and watch that. And they don't have to be expensive, functional labs. They can literally be the labs that you can get from your doctor's office. There's a couple of different ratios and things that you can look at on those labs specifically that will show you what's going on with your body as you go. So, this doesn't have to be a majorly expensive endeavor. The other piece of this too, and so those are three main pillars, right? So gut, your micronutrient deficiencies, and your inflammation, like those are three very critical pillars that you want to make sure are important. And part of that includes that daily nutrition. And then also there's the recovery piece, right? Rest and recovery. I was just talking to Chris, who is the producer of Wisp Sports, and we both prioritized some training and some rest this weekend. And, I have a tendency to love to go on my long runs and my long bike rides and training sessions on the weekends. And then I've got a lot of things to do around the property. I own multiple acres and I've got gardens going on, and we've got a lot of property cleanup. And then I've got, a remodel happening in my house. And so it's very common for me to be like, okay, got my training done. Now I'm going to be on my feet all day. What I did yesterday was I just decided to just chill out afterwards and just take like multiple hours and just sort of hang out and not do a whole lot and be off of my feet. And I'll be perfectly honest, I feel amazing today, and I feel a lot better and way less drained going into this week. So, there's definitely a balance there. And look, if I had toddlers running around, I realized that would not be the easiest thing to do, just rest and recover and sit. But I think the piece there is if you can try to build in some recovery and rest, or at least prioritize really, really good sleep and make sure you're eating enough food, there's a lot that can be balanced there if you are going to be on your feet, because you just don't really have a choice. So those are some 4 pillars that I think are very, very critical pieces that if you wanted to try to put these two together of this fitness and health and performance all together, that those are the 4 pillars that I work with on every athlete to do. And it's just part of the whole process, right? So, and it's a great place to at least start to build that foundation. One of the things that you can do if you do find this interesting, and how you can really, learn to perform well and achieve a personal best, and also try to get to a point where you're racing without pain or injuries, and put all of these things together, is that I do have just a free guide that I've produced and put together over the past 6 months or so of just collecting a lot of information from the athletes that I work with and trying to put together this like just a place to start that can work you through some of the things that we talked about today, that foundation of really good health and performance and what those pillars look like. And then how can you figure out if you have, a deficiency in an area, and then what can you do in order to move forward and start from there. So if you are interested in that, you can go to drkirstin.com/finish strong. That's DRKIRSTIN.com/finish strong. And get that download to just help give you a guide as far as like where to start. And there's a questionnaire in there and all of those things too. So as we wrap up, thank you so much for listening. I think I would really love to chat more. If you have any questions or comments on this topic, like feel free to come over to social media at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook or Instagram and start a conversation with me. I would love to hear your thoughts on this and dig in a little bit more as far as what you think about this topic. But yeah, so thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful. Make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels. And also if you loved this episode, like share it with somebody that you think might love it. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find me at drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. And you can always leave a direct message with us over on social media as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next week. Take care.